gentlemen, there's good people here today, so I know you try to talk with everybody around you, so please do that. It's a nice thing to do, and we only allow nice people here, so yes. Okay, so Darcy LALONDE, he's from Vancouver, BC, on the west side of Canada. He, when you see him, you know that he's a big guy, and in Canada, big guys who are athletic often become hockey players, and so this is one. He became a professional hockey player in the so-called minor leagues, but in Canada, people take hockey very seriously, so minor leagues is big time in Canada, I can tell you. So did that for a number of years, and then got into, no kidding, but he got into professional wrestling. So he became the, I don't know if you've seen, many of you haven't watched wrestling, but some of you may have remembered a character called the $1 Million Man. Some of you remember that character? He played that character for a period of time. One of the bad guy characters in that business. Yeah, interesting. So then he decided we better get a job. So he went to school and became an accountant. And I don't know what he was thinking, but he became an accountant and got into business. But the fundamentals of accounting, and not to put down our accounting friends because they're good people. It is the foundation of business, and he has built a good career from that. So he became CIO of a couple of major Canadian organizations. First came to Asia with an organization called ISMBC on a large project with the Asian Development Bank. I believe it was how he first came to Asia, yeah. And then stayed ever since. Built one company that was acquired by Datacraft. Many people in the IT business will know that's quite a major regional operation. Then set out again, built another organization that was acquired or merged somehow with Arinso, and he was assigned to run the Canadian operations and to start up the Asia operations. But he preferred to focus on Asia and did, despite others who disagreed at the time. But it became the Asia operations became the key growth asset when the company was acquired by Colbert Kravis Roberts in 2008, and worked with that group, which Darcy might describe as an interesting experience. And then finished with the group, and then now Shore Solutions, and a nice group here, and a lot of optimism and so forth for that group. So please, we'll welcome to the stage Darcy LALONDE, Shore Solutions.
All right, well, thanks, Richard. And I will give you a body slam later for that. People take you really seriously when you tell them you're a professional wrestler. And it is all real. You all believe that? It's kind of like the stock market. It's all real. Okay, so good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. This is slanted, so I'm going to have to get rid of that. It's quite an honor to have everybody here. So let me kick into it, because as people who know me well know that a 30-minute time limit for me talking is going to be difficult, because that'll be slide 1, and I have 47 or so slides. The other dynamic you may know is this is the most interesting title I think we could ever, Startups, Capitalization, the Evolution of the Entrepreneurial Spirit in the Philippines. It's a great title. What I really want to do today is just tell you a little bit about my experience over the last 10 to 15 years, which a lot of it's in the Philippines, and a lot of it's building business. And I find building business in the Philippines gives me the best returns of all the companies in the world that I've worked with. So share a little bit of it with you. For you real private equity statistics guys, I'm going to show some charts. If you ask me any questions, I will refer them to my M&A specialist. All we know is in private equity, trend lines that go up are good. Okay, so just remember that. Lines that go, well, for you guys, that way. Okay, Richard mentioned a little bit my history in terms of some M&A activities and what we've done over the years. Started out with ISMBC and started up an SAP practice, and actually this got very involved with Equicom And BC Telecom was bought by TELUS, and everybody knows around town that TELUS is a fairly major player in the call center side. So started that, DFI Consulting, and DFI is where I really started up some great stuff in the Philippines. It was an SAP consulting company, and I can say we were the most radical, strange group of people you ever met. It was with a Dutch guy and myself, but it's where I met a lot of the people. When I say about successful business in the Philippines, you need to get good local people that are experienced, trustworthy. You'll see it later, and you'll be very successful. And what are the two areas you need to have that in? One is a lawyer, because you always need to have lawyers, unfortunately. And the other one is an accountant. So I'd just like to quickly introduce two of the people. This is Attorney DeMellig. Are you here? So Attorney Al, I've worked with Al for 10 years, and give him a big round of applause because he's kept me out of trouble. Very important to have these people around you. And as I say, there are some very good people around the town. The other one that I'd like to quickly introduce is my CFO for various companies for the last 12 years, which is Lani Alcaceba. As well, it's hard to believe she's worked with me for 12 years because she was about 10 when you started. So she's, again, keeps the book straight, keeps the regulatory side reporting going. And again, we'll touch on this because it's all very important. Okay, so as I said, the first slide takes a while, but DPS, just if we go back, I think one of the most interesting sales that I ever did of a company was I joined Arinso International, and this will give you a little bit of insight to the CEO of Arinso and now Saffelberg. I worked for Arinso. I had a company in Vancouver that competed with Arinso, but that CEO didn't mind that, so it's a little bit of an interesting guy. So at a certain moment, he actually asked me to buy my own company. So that was really interesting because I said it was at least worth $15 million. And I told him that perhaps there was a conflict of interest that I shouldn't buy my own company. But this is, again, I guess, an example of, you know, good timing, but also relationships and ecosystems in terms of making things work. Arinso we'll talk about a little bit, and I am very honored to have my friends from NGA, Jan, who's really one of the first people in the office in the Philippines when we opened up in 2006. So again, appreciate you all coming out. And there's a number of current NGAers and a few ex-NGAers, but at the end of the day, we're all still friends. Which again, I think is important in business, is that your ecosystem does span beyond your company titles. At the end of the day, it's all about people. And you'll see that in my philosophy, it's a little bit different than some of the other organizations that way. Obviously, the other person I do want to say a big thank you to is Jonathan Smith, who, when I talk about examples of entrepreneurs and people that have really started things up and have really made things happen, I mean, John was the man at shore. And you know, we've had a great year together, and we're looking forward to a lot more. So again, Jono, thanks for coming today. Okay, I guess another quick one, because I have to get all my buzz. Next principles for all your social media needs. This is a company out of Palo Alto, and we all know about social media, particularly people like MC, who's on Facebook 24 hours a day. No, I shouldn't say that in front of your bosses, should I? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no worries. So it's again a company, a startup, sort of, again, for investment people. You can be angel investors. You can come in at different portions. This is our one angel investment, which is always scary because angel investment means likely the money will go to heaven and fly away. Chances of succeeding are small. But it was actually, again, a guy I worked with in Singapore. Really great guy, a really great product, and we're still hoping it pans out. We're still a year or two down the line here. All right, so a little bit about, you know, been bought, been sold, been fun. Okay, so that's, I've been on both sides of it where I've bought companies, I've been bought by small companies, I've been bought by big companies. And again, it's all very interesting, and some experiences are better than others. Okay? So, next slide. I guess my hero is Warren Buffett. And you know, for people who are familiar with Warren Buffett, what I like about Warren Buffett is the fact that he actually has passion about business. It's not about numbers, it's not about financial models. And again, when I've dealt with some of the bigger private equity firms, it's all about a model, and you have a financial model, and if you decrease costs by this much and you increase revenue by that much, then everybody gets rich. And I think people are familiar with that. But there's a dynamic to business that I think as a smaller equity player, we're actually excited about the businesses we get involved with, and we want to, when I got taken over by a big private equity firm, they thought I was the most horrible person because I was entrepreneurial. Okay, and again, in our model, we want the entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, though, don't take orders very well. Okay, so when you have a financial model and you say, can you cut 300 people in the Philippines because we need to save costs, while they take a private jet to meet you, and that's about 10 years salary for those people, then I'm one of these big mouth guys who say, that's a little bit of BS, guys. If you've got the money to take the private jet, then let's think about what we're really doing here in terms of the economic models. So Warren Buffett, he's a stock player. He doesn't need to take over companies 100%. He'll come in with minority shareholding. He'll look at the returns of the company, the leadership of the company, and it's not just about the economic trending of the stock market. Okay, because as many people have recognized, the stock market doesn't necessarily value a company at what it's really generating in terms of revenue. So again, I like his model, which is, take advantage of the market's mistakes. Okay, so again, it's valued poorly, but it's making lots of money. Why is that? Get in there, dig down, and get the company, get it over, take it over the hump. The other guy that, again, having been from Vancouver, the man who created the most millionaires in the whole Washington area, which is Bill Gates. So again, I like the fact when you have people with a lot of money who share it. And Bill Gates is one of them, and he's a very brilliant man, but also a very decent individual. So again, passionate about business. Next slide. Using your platform, whatever that may be, but obviously somebody like Warren Buffett, when he speaks, people listen. To use that to communicate with people, to motivate people. This is all what good business is about. Okay, it's not about financial models. Financial models are important, their targets are important, but it's not what motivates people to really make a difference. Next. How valuable your time is, and I think you have to be careful when you say this. That's not about being arrogant and not available for people. And I think one of the things that I've always tried to do is be very available for any level in the organization and spend that time to get people motivated and moving the same way you want. So it's again communicating with people, making them feel part of the passion, part of the emotion, and part of the business success. Okay. So the global investment market. So again, what I'll do is I'll touch a little bit about, my equity backing. I have my own fund, but then when I need big money, I have the former CEO of Arinso. So you can imagine that my whole little network here is really around an ecosystem of people that have worked together, succeeded together, and continue to work together. So his name was Josh Slice. And I guess, Richard mentioned earlier when I started Arinso in Asia Pacific, he wanted me to run Canada, and I told him Asia's a much bigger opportunity, so I'll fix Canada for you, but Asia's where it's at. And he told me I was completely out of my mind, but he must have been desperate to fix Canada. And as these guys know, a few years later, we were a couple thousand people and 100 million US in revenue. So again, with Jos, he's in Europe right now. He's got money to invest. He's doing it in the US and Europe, but the returns are actually not very good in the markets. So I think many people have seen it's hard to get money out of the markets in Europe, in the US, in Canada. And now people are really very much looking at Asia Pacific. The entry points are lower. So $1 million in the Philippines, I can start up a major business. $1 million in Canada, I can get some office space and hire a sales guy. Okay, that's really the fundamental difference. So to me, it's a lot more exciting. The upside is a lot bigger when I can come in to the markets like the Philippines. There's some tips and tricks around that because you can also bring your $1 million and be out of it very quickly as well, just like any other market. Okay, So I guess some of the economic prospects, and there could be some economists here that will know a lot more about this than I do. But again, from a summary level, financial markets have improved. I think everybody's seen that and felt that. I think one of the interesting dynamics now is as they improve, what will that mean about the distribution of that money? And I think this week you've heard about some people pulling out money out of the Philippine market in terms of bonds and things like that. But again, I think this is all cyclical in terms of investment in those types of facilities, whereas I guess what we focus on is really direct investment, which is all about business on the ground in the Philippines and building business as opposed to bonds and stocks. And the performance of bonds and stocks in the Philippines is great. I also participate in that because in Canada I can get a 1% return on my money, and in the Philippines I can get a 5% return with very little risk. So that brought a lot of money into the Philippines, but it's not necessarily money directly into the economy, driving jobs and all the rest of it. Okay? It's all good though. Capital costs are rising. Again, the high income countries are improving, and the banks are really playing a lot of games in terms of currency valuations and interest rates, and everybody's very concerned to keep balancing this off. I think one of the interesting dynamics is things like the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, and the US dollar. I mean, for us at Shore, we have a lot of Australian customers, and when you go from 60 cents on the dollar to $1, it's all great news, but then when you start falling back, of course, we complain a lot because suddenly it's to your negative. But obviously the currency fluctuations, and it's a key in the Philippines. We can't have the peso go too low. I mean, obviously we all know we have to pay labor. We're being paid by foreign currency, and it can really, I mean, what it does is actually reduce what we can pay the people. So again, this is one of the things that I like to always say is that, I think in our industry, Shore, we're one of the highest paying contact centers. And I'm proud to say that, and I like to think we get quality for that. But if costs go up around energy, rent, facilities, guess who gets squeezed in this? It's the people. So I think it's important to try to keep those cost elements in line. Stronger economic activity, so again, there is funds coming to Asia. So a lot of the funds are not being able to get the return on investment they want, the IRR, so they're coming this way. And they're looking for experts in country to run those funds. Because I think everybody realizes blind investment in developing nations can be highly risky. The growth in 2013 for developing nations, I mean, the Philippines is an exception, had a great first quarter 2013. Okay? And the inflationary, inflation is again something that we always have to watch out for in these markets. Everybody saw some of the impacts of the last crisis in Asia in '97 with the currencies and the inflation rates and all the rest. It can blow the economic models completely out the window. All right? So next slide. Global outlook, less volatility, somewhat stronger growth. The US continues to slowly get back up. Europe, in my opinion, is still struggling pretty mightily right now in terms of what they're going to do in terms of the marketplace. But, again, in Southeast Asia, in particular the Philippines, and you'll see some slides later where, in the last 3 years, the Philippines, from economic indicators, has outperformed places like Singapore, which is, very impressive in itself, and which can bring a lot of investment. Let's go to the next one. Investments in terms of dynamics for 2013. So the private equity industry, after the global financial crisis, which I think everybody recalls, I mean, private equity took a bit of a, what do we do now? Everything in our sale of Arinso to KKR was very much a debt sale. So leverage buyouts, high debt, really worked well prior to the global financial crisis, but then saddling companies with huge amounts of debt at huge interest rates, of course, without that economic growth, really created a problem in terms of those investments. And then you can imagine the exits of those investments have been very difficult. Okay, so there's a lot of private equity companies now sitting on assets, pre-global financial crisis models where everybody's going to get extremely rich. And after that crisis, the models don't work anymore. So again, the whole private equity world has had to relook at, and that's where people like Warren Buffett have succeeded. Okay, the big players, and KKR, you know, the barbarians at the gate, everybody's sort of familiar with these guys. They're sort of the first big boys, very successful, but the models are pretty financial based, and debt is hard to run these days in terms of that model. The changing contour of deal making. So again, people are very much looking at regional focus. So you'll tend to have in Europe, you'll have Eastern Europe. You've got sort of the core European countries. In Asia, it's very much as a block, Southeast Asia, with the exception many times of Singapore and the Hong Kongs and these ones, because they're a different market. But again, there is a lot of focus and attention coming. The exits, you know, you just don't see that many exits still. Okay, when I talk about exits, it's when private equity invests, they're going to double, triple, 7 times their money. There's a lot of great stories about that, but they're having trouble getting these exits. So there's this pent-up demand right now trying to get these things turned over. And unfortunately, it does impact the business that sits on the ground. So as you're a manager in those companies, and some of my friends are here, your head gets squeezed really hard, okay, because it's hard to make the model work. Funds in North America and Europe have been slow to return capital. So it's again why are Europeans and North Americans looking at bringing money here, because they can't get much return in those countries, and it's high risk. Okay, so you put in the $10 million, your upside is not that great, and your downside is that quite often these companies go under, they don't make it. Okay. Asia Pacific private equity, you know, you're hearing about it all the time. There's more money inflows coming in to Asia, and clearly the Philippines is attracting a fair amount of that interest, and for a number of reasons. Making acquisitions, raising new capital, and improving the performance of portfolio companies. Okay, so that's a little bit, you know, it's not that whole stock market play. It's really around direct business, which is, you know, as I said, an exciting time. The deal sizes are getting bigger. People are getting braver. They're getting more confident in the economic models. And again, particularly the Philippines is really internationally getting a much better reputation in terms of the markets. Exit opportunities, though, is shifting gears, and I think in our market, some of you have heard, you know, the SBI turnover, you know, exit, which is really exciting. I mean, it's very exciting for me because it was a good exit, and there's also, it shows opportunity in the market, and it shows opportunity of a local homespun Philippine organization that can really go international and do well. Again, there is the opportunity of big money, institutional big money coming in. Okay, so it's again important that, you know, the government continues to drive, you know, organizations like PEZA, keep the levels of professionalism up, keep the bad stories at a minimum. And I mentioned to Richard when, you know, Richard has that email that goes out to, is it 3.7 million people? It's a lot of people all over the world. And of course, I do get some response saying, well, you should be really careful about promoting the Philippines because I had this situation where, you know, somebody extorted money, somebody did this, somebody did that. And again, all I can say is that you need to make sure when you come here, a couple of things. If the deal's too good to be true, it probably is. And that's no different than anywhere else in the world. And secondly, for those who want to promise shortcuts, you want to maybe take a look at it. The setting up businesses very well defined here. If you set up businesses properly, if you do it following, you know, Al tells me, Darcy, this is what you need to do. This is the right way to do it. I've never had a problem doing business in this country. So, again, and it's not to, you know, if it's any of the people here today who have sent me these cautionary notes, I think it's always good to be careful in business, no matter where you are. But certainly, again, throughout Southeast Asia, the Philippines, and I've been in Thailand, I've been in Vietnam, I've been in other places starting businesses, and the Philippines is still easier to do, the startups. It's also less change in terms of the regulatory side. Okay, so in Thailand, sometimes they just completely change the rules on you. You know, they have these dramatic shifts between the taxing era and the non-taxing era. And it really left some people out to dry and lost some money. Indonesia, which is a big lion in terms of the economic drive in the region, but again, Indonesia, they can at times change their business laws very quickly, which can put your assets at risk. So, again, for any of the folks that have had bad experiences in the Philippines, everybody's had bad experiences. I had bad ones in Canada. Because every dollar I made, the government took half of it. It was a bad experience for me. So, sorry, Richard. I guess that's why you're here as well. But I do pay all my taxes. I want to point that out. So again, competition for assets. So again, I think what you're going to see is good businesses, good assets, good, land and all the rest is going to be at a premium as money comes in. So it is going to get more competitive. I will say it's one of the things that still has to be considered, and it's a bit controversial, is there is some barriers to investing in the Philippines, such as foreign investment cannot buy land. And again, if you're in hotels, it's a different model when you can't actually own the land as an international company. There's ways to kind of structure these things, but again, I think the government has to continually look at ways that how can you attract the investment without selling off, your entire set of assets. But in Canada, anybody can come into Canada and buy anything you want. And I'm not sure that's the right model, because again, I don't think you want to sell all your resources as a country. And again, this comes back to that whole free enterprise models. But, there is some limitations. There's some sectors you can come into in the Philippines and go 100%. But foreign investment, as many of you know, there are restrictions in terms of what we can do and the levels of investment we can put in. Which, again, would, I think, if you open some of these things up, it would help drive those industries. I guess Richard didn't mention, but I'm in two areas in the Philippines. One's in the BPO sector, which is, of course, well documented and a very healthy industry. And the other one is tourism. Because again, I think between those two industries, I think the BPO industry is regulated and doing pretty well. I still think tourism, there's a lot more that could be done in terms of regulating, professionalizing it. It always irritates me when I go to Thailand how great it is, how organized it is. When I go into a hotel, there's 25 things I can do. Everybody's pushing those things. We have just as beautiful islands here. We have English-speaking people. We have a history that's very interesting. And it's a bit of a shame sometimes that we can't get that together and put it together, because we should be able to outdraw Thailand. There's no reason why that can't happen. So I have invested in some resorts and such. So I do hope that will continue. But you can imagine, again, if you allowed foreign investment where you could buy the land, it may still drive more tourism around that. But then the question is that a good or bad thing for the Philippines and the Philippine people? And I won't comment on that. I'll leave that up to the politicians and the people. But again, value creation becomes imperative. Okay, so any investor, it's all about value creation. And value creation is about money in the pockets of shareholders and employees and stakeholders. Okay. Private equity exits, again, you did see that drop in terms of exits, and you see it here. But again, the good news is it's starting to wind up again. IPOs in Hong Kong are happening, Singapore, and in the Philippine market. The stock market's been very good. It's dropped a little bit, but that's part of the evolution of the stock market, I guess. Okay, so at the end of the day, what investors are going to look at is what are the exits that have happened in the last period of time before they start bringing in money. Okay. Asia. Okay, so again, what we're showing here is just a little bit of the inflow of cash that's coming into Asia from external. And I guess what I want to point out here is that growth where we had 2008, 9, and to 10, where it's doubled. That's not going to be there anymore. Okay, you're not going to get this radical doubling of inflows. But what we're seeing again is a nice trend going up, following really the economic growth, which is somewhere around 5 to 10%, which is kind of where the inflows are coming. Okay, so again, the money's coming. Let's use it wisely. Okay. In terms of the demographics in Asia, I mean, there's always two things, and particularly if you look at the Philippines, the average age of people is young. Okay, so we have a big workforce. We have opportunity to move a bigger middle class in the country. And I think that's economically really what is the most important thing in a developing country like the Philippines, is develop the education that can get people into that middle class. Okay, the demographics are good. It's obviously an opportunity, and your gross domestic product in terms of average per capita is again going up. Okay, so again, the old days, this used to be under $1,000. It's now $3,681. Okay? So that looks good. Investment cycle underpins rising GDP curve. I always love these kind of charts because look at that, it looks like nothing. It looks like my son and daughter drawing on a piece of paper. I guess, and I had to ask my M&A guy, so what does that mean? But what he pointed out is a couple things. One is that if you look at that bottom section in 2012, because I said to him, that doesn't look good, it's going down. But he said, actually, the good news is that the gross domestic product is actually growing faster than the investment is. So what it is an opportunity. Okay, so in the old days, you look at, the Indonesia was, and still is 33%. So the investment coming in is really fueling the growth, as opposed to organically growing itself. Okay? Next. Profitability in Asian countries is much better. Okay, it's very hard to get money out of the traditional markets. And again, what you see, everybody remembers 1997 in this region, profitability went negative. So again, that's always a risk, and that's one of the things investors will always be very careful of. And the two dynamics are inflation and currency valuation. Okay. Risks, there's two risks, and I just mentioned it before, which is inflation, a political climate, obviously, but let's hope Southeast Asia now is pretty stable. But the two things are inflation and currency valuation that can really knock things out of line. Okay? And I know the government's trying hard to capture both of those. Okay? So strengths of the Philippine economy specifically. Okay, so I always like to quote somebody who's more famous than I am, the World Bank. So that, and again, as I spend my spare time reading these kind of things, the World Bank documents are definitely the biggest. So they're really, really thick and very exciting to read. Whereas the Bains and the McKinseys are much more concise and get down to the brass tacks. But again, the World Bank, ranks the Philippines as a top destination for private investment, ahead of Indonesia and Malaysia. It's been unsteady. The opportunities are matched with the country's stable inflation rates and political stability. And again, I think the present administration has done a very good job of internationally keeping people at ease in terms of what's happening economically. So I think Nonoi's done a good job on that side. Okay. And this is again, I think something that's come out relatively recently. So I don't know if our president read the World Bank document before, but it really flows very nicely into the political stability, low inflation, low borrowing rates, opportunities for growth in almost all sectors. Okay, and again, Every time we talk about the Philippines, what do we talk about is the most important resource they have here, which, as you all know, is the people. There's a very good pool of people. The English skills are great. The ethic, the work ethic initiative is great. And it's, again, a pool that if we're going to keep growing in BPO and other sectors, it still needs to keep growing. At this rate, we're going to run out of good qualified resources. So it needs to continue to happen. So again, this is Morgan Stanley. And again, this is a nice chart because the lines go the right way. And what's the good news is, again, that the Philippines was outperforming what are considered the major players, which is Singapore from a financial services hub, and then Indonesia from a resource hub. Okay. So unique strengths, the credit rating upgrades, and invest to an investment grade. I mean, this is great news. This is something that has taken a long time for the country to get this level of credibility internationally. The GDP growth for 2012 is great, and for the first quarter was also very, very good. Okay, so again, economically, Philippines is doing well. Independent reports from HSBC, again, can you imagine the Philippines being, among the top 20 largest economies in the world? It is HSBC saying it, it's not me, but it's pretty exciting to think that that could be the case as we move forward. All the more to get into this market before it's too late, because it's going to get very competitive. Morgan Stanley, there's this whole tip, which is Turkey, Indonesia, and the Philippines as breakout nations. So again, this is some of the things I talk about with investors in terms of when they ask me, Darcy, why the Philippines other than you live there? And I say to them, the fact I live there is actually equally as important, because again, I know how to do business here. So between this and the fact that you have somebody on the ground, it can be very convincing to bring people in. And for the folks that are living here, this is an opportunity to actually become one of those consultants for some of these organizations. Key industry investments, I mean, obviously the BPO sector, which has just been an absolutely fantastic growth. If you think about the country, what if BPO wouldn't have happened? I don't know. It's a bit scary, actually, because it is certainly the growth sector, and of which I probably bet half of the people or more in this room are associated with, or it's driven by. Okay, and it's very exciting, and myself, I'm very proud of the Philippines in terms of a market to provide those services. With Arinso, and Jan and the guys know we had offices in India and Malaysia and Dalian in China. We had global delivery centers all over. But again, at the end of the day, I always believed that the Philippines was the place to set up the big delivery centers. Things like attrition and the loyalty of the people is just different than the rest of the markets. Okay, and we can talk about some of the other areas, but I mean, obviously manufacturing is an area where the Philippines had a lot bigger segment some years ago because of different drivers, cost of power, cost of land, and things like this is sort of wavered a little bit, but it seems to be coming back, which is good news. And then tourism. Okay, so again, I personally believe BPO and tourism are the two big ones that the administration should focus on. The stock market, as we mentioned before, I mean, it's really been a bit of a darling, and it's done very well, and I'll bet you some of the folks here have probably done well on that, because lately it's been hard not to do well. Everything's kind of going up. However, what goes up sometimes comes down, so be careful. Yep. Okay, talked about this already. Obviously gaming and entertainment is another big area, which the Philippines is seeing. Educational services, so I guess it's also educating. I'd like to point out it's also educating the people of the Philippines as well. It's going to be a huge industry, and I hope that will continue to move ahead. And the health and wellness side as well is obviously another area where there is opportunity, and I've seen definitely some people coming into that. So the Philippine tourism side, again, everybody's, I don't know if you've seen this, but obviously Boracay is one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. When I first came here 14 years ago, it was really beautiful. and now it's time to open up some other islands. So this is, again, one of these things that can be frustrating. I mean, in Thailand, you have Koh Samui, and you have Phuket, and I mean, Phuket is a humongous piece of land with many, many tourist spots along it. In the Philippines, we got a lot of islands, a lot of beautiful beaches. You know, let's not saturate one. Let's keep growing more and more and more. Because it's always nice for people to go 3 days here, 4 days there. Certainly Palawan is really changing the dynamics. I remember looked at doing some things there 10 years ago, and it was almost impossible to even get there. To try to construct anything was difficult. But again, it's opened up. The good news is, but it's not destroying the environment. So it's still difficult to go into Palawan and build, but for the right reasons. So don't cut all the trees down, don't ruin the environment, because it's some of the things you have to be careful with. So again, Boracay is definitely a great destination, and there's a lot of showcases, but it's now to multiply those. And our friends are building out, over by the Mall of Asia and doing all that exciting stuff. Again, most countries, when you're around water, it's the most expensive real estate you can have. Somehow here, I can't wait for those houses and condos to go along the Pasig River. It really, in any other country in the world, that's where all your exclusive housing is. So there's a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of water to look at. So let's keep building it. Okay. So the BPO side, so again, I won't try to belabor too much on this because I think most of you know, and Richard's going to kick me off soon. So again, the revenues hit 13.4, growth, and again, this is exciting. Growth of 28% compounding annual growth rate. That's good, that's exciting. Okay, it's a huge growth rate. In terms of employment, again, it's a huge employer in the country. And if you look at the leveraging of every dollar paid to somebody, it kind of multiplies by 3 or 4 in terms of the economic value. Is all very important in terms of the economic model. New cities opening up. I know some friends that are going to Cebu to run things there. Davao, all very exciting to sort of get this now spread out a little bit, because Metro Manila is definitely not saturated, but we can put up another 100 buildings in the fort. And again, for people, 10 years ago, the fort was an empty field, and look what's happened to the fort. It's just amazing what's happened out there. I think Sheila sold the whole thing, did you? Yeah. Or is it just your name everywhere? Okay. Okay, BPAP forecast. So again, when you look at up to 2016, you could have up to 1.3 million people employed in the BPO industry. It's pretty impressive stuff. Obviously, beyond that is the whole office space needed. That's where, again, Sheila gets very excited that you need to have office space to house all these people. Okay. I guess some of the recent M&A activity, so I just wanted to sort of show again that there's a lot of things that have been happening in the last while. I guess one of the most exciting ones that I've been part of with Jono at the shore side is that we acquired a company called Rainmaker Asia. So it's, again, quite a successful company with around 1,000 seats. And again, these are, you're going to see more and more of this consolidation in the contact center world, or at least I believe there is, and there has been quite a bit already. A lot of opportunity, and when you look at our economic model that we look at for good opportunities, there's a whole bunch of people that have 200-seat call centers out there. And sometimes it's how do you get over that hump? And I'll talk a little bit about that after. SPI, which again has been a really great thing in the market. This is quoted a lot, and kudos to the team in terms of what they've been able to do. The whole Ayala with Stream, again, there's been a number of iterations around this, and it's all exciting as it sort of moves up the value chain. Convergys, well, Convergys is interesting because when I was with Arinso, we bought their BPO arm. NGA bought Convergys's BPO arm, of which some people here today came through that. And it was always great to say that at NGA we bought Convergys. that was only a small section of it, but it was interesting how this plays out. And I guess Hans, you must know about this, do you? Yeah. How's it going? Very good. Very good. You wouldn't say otherwise. Okay, NIIT Technologies with Sabre Holdings, and a number of other ones that go back a little bit farther. But the good news is there's a lot of activity going on right now. Okay. All right. Well, this I guess is where I get to the meat of my presentation, which will take about 1 minute. Okay, investment approach. I guess I do work with a company called Saffelberg. And again, right now it's a private equity of about 250 million euro. And again, what we really want to do is find companies that have good entrepreneurial management, good ideas, cash positive, and then we will come in a minority stake, majority stake, buy the whole thing, whatever the matter is, but we just want to get involved with good businesses, with good management teams, with good upsides. Okay? Again, not that hung up on sectors. My specialty obviously is in IT, BPO, and then I'm an expert in tourism because I like to go to resorts and hotels. But again, that's really our side here. In Europe, it's very different, but it's again looking at, this entrepreneurial management. That's real key for us. And to be honest, when we were acquired by KKR, I was too entrepreneurial for KKR. They called me a cowboy. I was too entrepreneurial. I didn't always agree. I said things. Whereas the nice thing now is that when I've come in and I've worked with John at Shore, I'm called the corporate guy. So it's interesting how the evolution can change. Okay. So it's not just about money. Oftentimes companies need money, they need equity, they need debt, whatever form you want to take that in, convertible debt, all sorts of ways you can do this. But the bottom line is that we want to be involved, to be an active shareholder, and again, where I think John would attest to, when we need lawyers, when we need M&A specialists, when we need these specialists, we have them accessible. Because again, these are difficult skills to bring in to a deal when you're a small company. Okay? So this is, again, once in a while when I need a funny Belgian guy to come over, because Saffelberg's from Belgium, not just Jan, but it's a great opportunity to bring in some very experienced resources. Okay, so I guess this was an investment approach that we've put together, and I'm very proud to say that actually at Shore we've managed to almost be identical to this. So I'm just hoping now you'll see the end, which is the end of this. So I guess, again, in terms of this entrepreneurial evolution, there's a lot of great people with great ideas out there. They may have money, they may not have money. Okay, so you get this great idea, and I know Jono, he's been working in this industry for a while. He got tired of kind of making other people rich, so he started his own gig. Probably exhausted every penny he ever had, because that's normally what happens. You believe in what you're doing. You may not get anybody else to. In terms of capital, I guess one of the challenges we all have is banks don't give you money. Go to your bank and ask for a loan. Good luck. Yeah, our interest rates are low, but how do you get that money? It's very difficult. And as a foreigner, it's impossible, actually, for me to really go to banks and get anything here. Okay, so it's, again, startup mode. All I can say when you're in that startup mode, because sometimes it's people that are technicians, people that are brilliant in their own right, but may not be brilliant about creating business plans and setting up organizations. And again, what I would say is that at any point in time, when you're at that stage, sit down and at least draw what you think your revenues are going to be and what your base costs are going to be. Because if that model doesn't work right off the get-go for 2 years and you only have $100,000, you're going to be bankrupt in 6 months. Okay, so again, look at that. The other thing is set your companies up properly. Okay, and again, Al's very good at keeping me in line here. if you don't set the company up initially properly, you really have a lot of hassles to fix it. And I guess that's one of the areas with Jono, I think we helped Shore, because it was again, started small, and what kind of industry is it in, and is it PESA certified, and all these things. It's important to get that right, because if you don't, it's really hard to unravel it all. Lanny spent about a year doing that. Now we're completely and utterly compliant with everything. It's great news. So as we go along, this is sort of your capital side, which means you've taken your entire life savings and your friends, your family. You start selling flowers and stuff. You just need capital to run the business. And guess what the other nice thing about this, and I know this happened with Jono, you don't ever get paid. Your staff get paid. Because if you don't pay your staff, then you're also dead. You're finished. So it's again important to be able to pay the staff and show credibility as a business. Getting your facilities in terms of your office space and how you're going to work through that, again, is also very important. Because you can get hung up in leases that make your life very difficult. So again, think about what your business plan is. Think about what you're taking for a lease. Growth is difficult in the real estate sector. As with Shore, we went from 200 to 2,000 in the last 12 months. So unfortunately, we're not in one physical location, because it's kind of hard to predict that. You can't take 2,000 seats and have it empty for a year. Again, you will be fundamentally bankrupt if you do that. So you got to plan this out. Fit outs. So another area that I think is really important is that I see a lot of companies come in and they pay ridiculous amounts of money to fit out offices. And it's, again, get into the local ecosystems and understand what it is you're doing, because you don't need to pay crazy amounts of money. Okay? You need to be smart when you do this. Okay? And it's, again, this room here, BPAP, these are places where people may have done it wrong once, but they'll be able to lead you in the right direction. I think the chambers, with Richard and the American Chamber, Canadian Chamber, Australian, Norwegian, whatever it may be, again, are good people to connect you in this ecosystem. Okay, so I know Jono was going along great, little office, and it's probably as big as you thought, 50 people. This is great. Kind of goes nice. But again, what happens is you kind of grow to that 100, and you need to either get bigger office space, or you keep running the way you are. And at 100 or 200 seats in a call center environment, you're still basically breaking even. Okay, and I know, and you're not getting, Jono's still not paid. So he's working his butt off. You're working to make sure your employees are paid, that you're creating a professional organization. But I call it the payroll phase, when every payroll is a nightmare. Because you have to, when your working capital needs, which is another, big thing in terms of investors, it's not so much about what I pay for something, it's about what is the working capital requirements. How much money do I need to keep this thing churning? Because when I invoice customers, as you all know, I don't get paid right away. I get paid in 30 days, and you have some customers that just pay when they pay. And that's just the way it is. Now we have people that go out and try to fix that, but again, in today's world, cash is king. So everybody's playing the same game with each other, right? So I'm trying to negotiate with my vendors. No, I'm going to give 45 days. I want 60 days. I want 90 days. If somebody asks me to give them that, I tell them, "Are you crazy? You could not possibly do that. 30 days. I want 15. I actually want you to prepay it." Unfortunately, they don't agree, and everybody's playing the same game with each other. Okay, so it's, again, how do you manage that cash flow? And when you don't have a big lump of money behind you in terms of on your balance sheet, then it's hard to manage this. So the payroll phase hits. It can be frustrating, but you see all of a sudden that you have this demand that actually, if you could put another 100 seats on the ground, you'd sell them. Wouldn't be a problem. You've got a reputation, things are coming in, it's going well, but how do I get over this hump? And to actually give myself economies that allow me to actually pay myself. Okay, so, and this is, again, where, and I'm not, John will put more than a year into this. But it was certainly at shore when I first met Jonathan and Richard Weatherston, who were the primary owners at that point. There was a huge demand of people ready to take on their services, but there was really nowhere to go, nowhere to build that up. So it was, great timing. It's again interesting because Richard and Jono both lived in the Philippines for more than 10 years, yet we had never crossed paths, and I'd been here for 13 years. So again, sometimes it's a small place, but in other ways, it's amazing how we didn't cross paths. But, again, we came in, we added infused some cash. So the reality is Jonathan and Richard didn't get rich at this point because I didn't want them to be rich, because I want them to still work hard with us and lead this thing. And, together they are the entrepreneurs who built this thing. So we don't have to eliminate that. We want to actually grow upon it. Whereas again, if you get the big institutional guys, quite often the first thing they want to do is get their people in. Okay? When I think of this, the original entrepreneurs are very important to the long-term goals of the company. I guess where I like to also add value is to bring in some people, but it's bringing the people at some of the middle management layers and there's a whole table of people here that have worked for me from one company to the other. And I don't apologize for that. I just keep bringing them along because they're great people, they're experienced, they know what they're doing, and they deliver. And I think, Jonathan would say there's been some people come over really help. And they are local people. And no offense to foreigners, but you're all too expensive. In terms of the economic models, we're not here to hire foreigners to do these jobs. We need to have, maybe there's some leadership guidelines and principles, but at the end of the day, there is really good, talented people here. But I think, on the foreign side of my hat now is to say, sometimes you need to pay a Filipino as much as you pay a foreigner. You just don't have to give them housing and schooling and drivers and maids and nannies and my foreign friends are going to kill me now. Because the reality is that has happened, right? I mean, the expat packages are not what they used to be. Okay, and that's the reality is this is not exactly a danger zone to live. It's a great place to live that a lot of people want to live. Same as a place like Singapore. There's no expat packages in Singapore anymore. You want to live there, live there. If you don't, you go. Okay? So I think it's a great opportunity to the Philippines to raise to those levels, build the local management. So we put in a little bit of money, and then I got Jonathan to agree to let me work with him to maybe help out, which again, there was enough scale in the organization because it was 200 people, so there's enough scale to kind of take on another partner, which we did. And I think it's only been, I guess, John, just more than 1 year right now since we worked together. So you get that capital in, we were able to expand within months from 200 to 500, because that was that demand that was sitting there waiting. So immediately up to 500, and everybody knows when you talk about organic growth, that's a pretty decent organic growth trend. So we're pretty happy with that. Organic growth year on year. So again, if you want to keep growing at 200% per year, I always used to say it's really easy to grow 200% per year when you have 10 employees. So 200%, I get 30 employees now. The problem is when you get bigger, it's kind of hard to grow by 200% when you have 1,000 people. That's adding 2,000 people. So again, that economic compounded annual growth becomes more complex. Again, what our investment strategy is very handy to have, is if, shall we call distressed opportunities or just really good opportunities pop up in terms of acquisitions and M&A. So there's always opportunities in the market. Some of them are known, but a lot of the good ones, nobody even knows they're for sale. So that's again where it's important to be involved in the ecosystem. It may not even be for sale. They may not even thought it was an asset that was worth anything. But it's again being involved with the local ecosystem. And it was very much a stumble when we came across the Rainmaker opportunity, which it wasn't published. It's not in the it's not in the real estate magazines. So it's again, how do you find out about these? But again, it was an opportunity for us to get involved in terms of an acquisition of 1,000 seats. So we were roughly 500, and we're looking at taking over an organization of 1,000 seats, which then really, in 1 year puts us from small to really the mid-sized contact center space, where we're not Convergys, because Convergys, what, hands here, 40,000 or something, you got 35,000. But we've now moved up to a really viable mid-level contact center, which for us was hugely exciting. And again, the key for this in terms of the Suffelberg relationship is that if you were going to do these acquisitions, being able to negotiate, knowing that I can hold money like that is extremely powerful. There's no other way that you can negotiate than when you can say, I have the cash and you need it. And that's really what it comes down to oftentimes in negotiating these types of deals. I don't have to go to the bank. It's not subject to any sorts of approvals or board approvals. It's if you want to sign now, in the next 12 hours, we'll send the money over. And that's really kind of the dynamic flexibility that it's really great to work with Suffelberg and Joss, who's a good friend and somebody we've worked together a long time. And for Rainmaker, we were able to do that. They needed to turn quickly. We turned it. We did it. And I know a lot of people kind of came around, well, how did that happen? Well, it happened because we could move really quick. And we were able to produce what needed to be done. Again, in terms of an acquisition, so this was a great acquisition, but the working capital needs were huge, because you've got a company that's under distress. It was not profitable. There's reasons why people want to divest of things. So it's, again, being able to turn them around, but have the working capital necessary to run the business. So that's where I think a lot of people get into problems. They say, geez, I only paid this much for it, but they don't realize that the liabilities are going to crush you. It's going to actually kill the original company. Okay, so that gets us through, basically 12 to 18 months that was short. As you move along, then again, it's really about planning your organic growth. Do you do more M&As? Do you consolidate? Are you consolidated? I mean, that's obviously another dynamic that, maybe the Convergys crew will come over and say, Jono and Darcy, you've been so successful, we want to get rid of you because you're annoying us. You're taking our business. So again, what are the dynamics behind that? What are the multipliers? It's both ways now. So, eat or be eaten, I guess, is one of the ways to look at it. But I think that one of the differences that we do have is that we don't have timelines on this. If we can run a business that just makes good EBITDA every year, has good revenue, it makes money for the shareholders, you know what? There's just absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can share the money with the employees. You can, give bigger packages, bigger opportunity for people. So at the end of this, it's really about being very proud of the business we're in, proud of the employment that we give to people. And if we're all just churning and making good money, it doesn't have to be an exit. It doesn't have to shoot it to an IPO. It doesn't have to be sold to a private equity company or a private sale. We're quite happy just making money as we go along. Okay? So, it's a little bit the evolution. I guess historically we've typically had 3 to 5 year exits because, again, we're dealing with smaller companies. We're not really taking on the big companies. Okay? In terms of, I guess my personal experience, and I've touched upon some of these, but again, and I was quite surprised by some of the emails I did get about warning me about the Philippines. And again, what I say is that I've been here a long time, and I can understand where some people maybe found the experience to be tricky. And I'll use the word tricky. But know the market you're going into. Don't think you know it all. Because if you come into the Philippines and you've never been here and you think you know it all, you're in big trouble. Okay? It's like any market you go into, it's admit what you don't know. Okay? And get expertise around that and surround yourself with people that you can trust. Okay, local experience, trustworthy people, and again, I do know some folks. They're very naive because again, it's a developing country. Oh well, you don't really need a visa. Get your visas, folks, because you're going to get into trouble if you don't. Get your proper visas. Get your stuff together. Get your setups going in the right direction. Because if you don't, there is opportunity for people then to make your life really miserable. Okay, so I have some friends that they were here and they didn't have proper visas, and then they got into fights with their partners, into their business partners, and guess what happened? Well, that partner said he didn't have his visa. Well, if you expose yourself to that, then don't complain to anybody else. You don't have your act together. You can end up in trouble. Get your stuff done. Get it done properly. Don't think because you're in the Philippines that people are not smart, that the government doesn't catch you. Expose yourself. Be responsible because you may get caught. And in today's terms, I can tell you things have changed a lot the last few years. Certainly, he's really working hard with BIR and some of these other institutions to really drive a proper professional level of getting things done. So if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. That guy that can do everything on the side and make it happen easy, it doesn't work that way. So do it properly. Your legal entities mentioned before, it's important to set up your legal entities properly. As a foreign investor, even more so. Okay, so you need to set up your companies properly. You have to have the proper boards and the proper constructions, and if you do, then it's never going to be a problem because you are following absolutely the guidelines set out by the government. And the government doesn't change those guidelines dramatically to try to screw the foreign investor. It's never happened yet, and I doubt it ever will. Okay, utilize the local ecosystem. Talked about that before. Forums like this, BPAP, CPAP, the Chamber of Commerce. Go to your local pubs. Jonathan just specializes in that. And again, you meet people. And there's a lot of people here that you meet in different forums, different places. But I'll tell you, it's where you get the real inside information. Usually after the third or fourth beer or whiskey. And you get the real news. Hire a strong and experienced local team. So again, make the effort, find the local resources, embrace them, trust them, and let them grow, and coach them and guide them. But I can tell you that I'd much rather have my management team here than a bunch of Belgians. The Belgians drink too much. So make sure you set up your facilities right. So again, oftentimes you rush into getting facilities and office space, and you got to be careful here because it's a big expense line item. And then, it's one of the things in the Philippines where rent is relatively high. Okay? Power costs are relatively high if you're taking big seat sort of facilities. So just be careful when you do this and plan it out properly because it can get you into trouble. Okay, so again, work with your different, there's Colliers, there's Jones Lang LaSalle, there's lots of really good folks out there to work with. If you get stuck in a building with 1,000 seats and you're really screwed up because you only have 5, oftentimes you can go back to those brokers and say, look, you need to help me sublet it. You need to get me off this hook. Okay, so always keep that in mind. There is a demand now for that space, particularly in some of the the PEZA zones where there's still a shortage of seats, but with all the building going on, I'm assuming eventually it's going to catch up. Okay, drive entrepreneurial spirit, and again, I guess this is something I'm very passionate about, is that every peso we make as a company, you should think of as your own peso and just don't blow it on stupid stuff. Okay? Because you know what, if we keep that peso in the bank, then maybe we can give you a bonus with it instead of paying stupidly out into doing things that don't make sense. So it's again really that ownership component and feeling like this is my company, it's my peso, and we'll do well. Empowerment and accountability. So again, I think it's, oftentimes foreigners will sometimes say that's an area that needs to be improved from the local management, is to be able to take the initiative, be able to drive things. But on the other hand, it's a two-sided sword here where you actually need to empower people to do it, and then make them accountable, but at that same time, coach them and work them through it, because as you do that, the second time it will go really easily. Okay? So sometimes it's an area where there still needs to be development, and that's how you build your great managers for the future. Develop the local talent, and again, the folks know at NGA and whatnot, most of my country managers throughout Asia were local country managers. It's something that I believe is important in terms of driving succession planning, motivating your people. That's why there's low attrition, that you actually promote people within. And again, I hope someday Jonathan and I will be able to walk into the sunset, and Shore will be managed by a Filipino CEO. So that's really what our goal is at the end of the game. And I think most importantly is that when you're doing this, actually when I bought into the resort, which was after our NGA experience, I actually thought I was going to retire and sit at a resort every day. It was okay for a couple of weeks, but I realized it was really boring just watching the water and sand, and my friends had jobs, so they didn't hang with me all the time. So, again, I think what is important is that whatever you do, it's infectious. If you're passionate about it, and if you're loving what you do, your people will also love what they do. So it's, again, in terms of, I think the Philippines in particular, the morale and the enthusiasm of the people is very infectious, and it's great fun to work with all of them. So that, it's certainly not a technical depiction of things you need to do, but I hope it's a checklist that if you stumble on any one of these, it can be a major problem where you'll send me an email and say you shouldn't invest in the Philippines. But again, if you cover those off, I think you'll be in good hands. Okay? So that was the end of the deck. Am I okay, Richard?
Very comprehensive. We're running on, but everybody seems mesmerized. So, questions? Perhaps I could. I also did receive some emails when I sent the email about your. It was Darcy's quote about, Philippines being the easiest place in Asia. A comment, and people did send me messages about, the corruption issue and so forth. But what do you think is the advice you would give about people? Sometimes people come and say, you have to pay for this, and so what's your advice on that?
Well, I think I've said to many people, I've never paid anybody anything here. And I think that's the first answer. Because there will be people that will say they can do all sorts of things for you for money. And all I've just said is no. So I think, when in doubt, it's a Western business philosophy here. It's very easy to follow. So just get in there and do it. Get your proper lawyers and such. Get them involved and just do it properly. Shortcuts can get you into trouble. So, I think, whether it's a resort, a bar, a restaurant, if you never pay anything, then nobody ever comes back and asks again. And I think Canadians were unique because we just pretend we're really stupid. Money, what's that? We're able to, and then we normally apologize. As Canadians, we always apologize. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't give you any money. I didn't know that's what you wanted. Or I would, but now I'm complete. I don't need it.
Okay. No, but just shy people here. You mentioned the examples: business process outsourcing, tourism, two main areas that you see. And you talked a bit about Southeast Asia, although not in as glowing terms as Philippines. But I was under the impression you're open to the region for opportunities and so forth. But you seem to indicate more focused on Philippines. Is that right?
Yeah, and I guess it really comes back to the fundamental that when we're involved with business, we want to be on the ground with the business. And at this point, for Saffelberg and myself, that's me, and I'm in the Philippines, and I actually don't want to travel anymore because I did it for 25 years. So, our focus is on the Philippines, but, again, when you look at Indonesia, which is, certainly a lion, big opportunities, it's a much trickier place to do business, and we have done business there. But like I said, I think, again, you need to be on the ground. You have to have local partners. You have to have relations with trustworthy people, and we don't have that level of comfort. Vietnam's another one that is really growing, but again, it's really emerging. I mean, there's not a lot of experience setting up Vietnamese companies. So a lot of people are going in, looking at it. Out of 10, 9 of them usually leave. But I think that's getting better now as their political structures and government process gets identified.
Okay, very good.
And then Singapore's too expensive. I lived in Singapore 10 years, great financial services hub. But can you imagine setting up an office the size of this here is going to cost you a fortune. So it's not in our economic model, it's just too expensive. A sales office perhaps, but we would never set up any real brick and mortar kind of big seat stuff.
Okay, very good. More questions? Come on. Okay, here we go at the back. Rafael, I think it is? Miguel, sorry, got it.
Good morning, Mr. Lalonde. That was an incredible presentation. There's lots of cold, hard facts there that I'm very glad to hear. But I'd like to know, there's a very optimistic prospects for BPO right now. In fact, it was, you mentioned that up to 1.5 million jobs will be created in the next few years. But are the prospects just as good for, you say BPAP, they're also very supportive of part-time and freelance work. So what kind of prospects can we expect from that end of the labor force, from the part-time and freelancers doing stuff on behalf of BPO and IT?
Yeah, well, I guess as we see the growth, and that's what I mentioned before, is that as foreign investment comes in, I think there's definitely an opportunity for that freelance and consulting groups to show your experience in the country, and actually execute and deliver in terms of that whole startup and moving in to a country. So, I think, that's also part of the evolution of the expat packages, to be honest. There's a lot of expats that really love it here. Their companies have now downsized in terms of the expat privileges and whatnot, because it is a privilege, it's not a package. And oftentimes, suddenly local management can handle it. So there's, I think there's a great pool of really experienced people that want to live here and want to help these companies come in. And I hope they do that, as opposed to, and again, not to discredit anybody, but oftentimes you'll get a UK-based company, they'll hire, one of the big names, and they'll pay these guys 2,000 euros a day. And frankly, they're from the office in London. They don't know anything about the Philippine organization. You're paying 2,000 pounds a day. You're actually getting the local rep here to do it, which that guy is not getting 2,000 pounds a day, I can assure you. And you're not going to get the same level of services as the people that provide this advisory on-the-ground services. The challenge is always going to be, what's your credibility, what's your business, what's your background? And it's, again, maybe there's a regulatory side to be certified that you are a government certified advisor, because again, everybody's always going to be careful if you don't carry the big name brand.
Thank you very much, sir.
Very good. Okay.